Chapter 12 of The Adventures of a Nature Guide by Enos Mills. This Librivox Recording is in the public domain. What I wish to bring out particularly does not concern the enrichment of botanical and zoological knowledge, greatly important as I regard this, but rather the enlarging and liberalizing influences which nature has on the public mind generally. Dr. William E. Ritter. Chapter 12. A Day with a Nature Guide. One morning 6 variously attired people, 4 men and 2 women, started from a hotel in the Rocky Mountain National Park with a nature guide. An auto whirled them to the end of the road far up the mountainside, from whence they continued afoot. They were bound for one of the eternal snowdrifts on Long's Peak. The essence of nature guiding is to travel gracefully rather than to arrive. This guide tactfully put 2 or 3 at ease by convincing them that in the United States the belief in ferocious animals is a superstition, and no one, he continued, in this locality has ever been attacked by a wild animal. The day was perfect, but so interestingly did the guide describe experiences in storms that everyone hoped to be rain in the face before evening. The guide was jollied for being silent. These people, true to the customs of the day, asked for rubberneck specialties and demanded where the megaphone artist was. They were climbing in a V-shaped canyon, traveling west. Presently the guide pointed out that the right or north wall rises steeply in the sun and is covered with a scattered growth of stocky, long-armed pines. The left or south wall, which faces north, has a crowded growth of short-armed, tall spruces. In the bottom of the canyon, between these closely approaching but unlike forests, is a lively stream with a few accompanying firs, willows, and flowers. Each member of the party remembered something of plant distribution, and each contributed something to the discussion concerning plant zones, slope exposure, temperature, and moisture, the determinism of ecological influences. When the scraps of information ceased, the guide added that each canyon wall also had its special kind of insect and mammal life, and that each of these tree species had its peculiar insect enemies and its bird and animal neighbors. Then, too, each individual bird and animal, every pair or flock, claimed a small bit of territory and commonly lived closely within this, likewise insisting on neighbors keeping within their own reservation. The nature guide is at his best when he discusses facts so that they appeal to the imagination and to the reason, gives flesh and blood to cold facts, makes life stories of inanimate objects. He deals with principles rather than isolated information, gives biographies rather than classifications. People are out for recreation and need restful intellectual visions, and not dull, dry facts, rules, and manuals. What the guide says is essentially nature literature rather than encyclopedia natural history. This party, being interested in the distribution of plant and animal life and in erosion, the guide made these the features of the day's excursions. In a mountain region, widely varying life zones are seen side by side, and 2 or 3 types of erosion may, in places, be seen from one viewpoint. The wear and tear on the earth's surface by many forces stand out unmistakably. All that the guide said concerning erosion could be set down under the heading, "The Biography of a Canyon." The various forces of erosion, running water, frost, ice, and acid, each at work in its respective place with distinctive tools, were prying, wedging, cutting the canyon wider and deeper. Roots wedged the rocks and dissolved them with acids. but at the same time helped also to resist those tireless forces, placing a binding, holding network of fibers. Gravity handled the transportation of dislodged material. Each species of plant and animal is of orderly distribution and is found in the places that furnish it the necessities of life. On the middle slopes of the Rocky Mountains are trees, flowers, and animals that are not found 1,000 feet further up the slopes, nor down the slopes 1,000 feet in the foothills. The guide's discussion was the autobiography of each species, the story of my life, or how I came to be where I am and what I am. In this, each plant and animal gave its adventures, its customs, its home territory, its climatic zone, and all the endless and insistent play of the radical and romantic forces of evolution, environment, and ecology. A few popular and scientific names of species were learned, but the guide was reticent about giving classifications. His chief aim was to arouse a permanent interest in nature's ways, and this by illuminating big principles. Climbing silently out of the canyon up a moderate slope just under timberline, this party halted among the trees for a few minutes on the edge of a small grassy opening. A deer and her 2 spotted fawns walked out into view, then went across into the woods. All turned aside and followed a porcupine that was lumbering across the opening, ignoring their presence. The guide remarked that there may have been a time when the porcupine threw its quills, standing up and hurling them, he imagined, like a primitive man a spear, but that the present development of this animal would prevent the quills from being thrown more than 3 or 4 inches. However, the other woods fellows make it their business to keep out of his way. He has long been known as the stupidest fellow in the woods. He is the only one who never appears to play. He has no interest in natural history, in nature guides, nor in the world. Being so well shielded and having an inexhaustible food supply in the boundless forests, he has not developed his wit. Up and on the party went, except a man and woman who lingered to watch Porky. In the edge of the woods the guide stopped to wait for the stragglers, but plainly panic-stricken at being separated from the party, they were just disappearing in the woods headed north. Asking the others not to stir until he returned, the guide dashed after them. On reuniting the party, the guide discussed the necessity of staying together. Most people, he said, are easily confused and lose their direction. Thus it is bad for one to forge ahead, or to turn aside, or to stay behind. Moving together is absolutely necessary for the happiness of the party. Once, he continued, a capable fellow said he would go ahead and wait for us at the foot of a nearby cliff. He never reached the cliff. While looking for him, others of the party scattered, and each and all were lost and remained out overnight. A little before noon they walked out of the uppermost edge of the woods among the dwarfed trees and distorted groves at timberline, an aged and battered forest, small and strange. They were above the altitude of 11,000 feet. While they were resting, the guide called attention to the abundance of paintbrush, variously called the painted cup and Indian paintbrush, which was growing nearby. Digging down to the roots of this plant parasite, he said, you will find the roots of one specimen clasped over the roots of another. Of course, its parasitic habits have given in part the form to its leaves and bracts. The mountain climbers at once asked for stories about the character and habits of other flowers and of trees. Beyond them, on the edge of an Arctic moorland, lay a snowfield about 2 blocks long. It appeared somewhat like uncut marble, stained with rock dust, inlaid with wind-blown beetles and grasshoppers, its granular material lay melting in the sun. A bright flower border encircled it. It was made up of flowers of many kinds and colors, flowers with and without perfume, flowers dwarfed, and flowers on tall, stately stalks. In small compass were a variety of soil, moisture, and temperature conditions. The soil along the upper edges of the snowfield was coarse and dry, below fine and moist. Each species of plants was occupying the peculiar place in which it could best flourish, or from which it could exclude competitors. It was determinism, conditions determining the distribution. It probably is true that many of these flowers were developed around the Arctic Circle. The guide recounted the great Ice Age story, how plant and bird and animal life had been swept southward by the irresistible, slow-moving glacier. On the mountains the seeds grew, found a home, so too the ptarmigan, its conditions somewhat similar to the old homes in the Arctic. In this new colony these birds and flowers still maintain the traditions of their respective old families. "I am disappointed in finding bird life so rare," said one man of the party. "I have seen only one bird this morning." The guide remarked that he had seen at least 12 species of birds, and that directly before them at that moment were 3 species in plain sight. Why had he seen but a single bird? His eyes had not been trained to see. A day with a nature guide may help to train the eyes and all the senses. A picnic party usually does much talking and more eating. A sightseeing party often does things by the book and talks by comparison. A botany or a birding party is absorbed in details, but a nature-guided party is vastly different from these. All of the party have a broad outdoor interest. They are not in a hurry. They are in a mood to be human. They make intimate friendships while getting acquainted with nature. One day's companionship in the wilds often better acquaints people with each other than years of ordinary association. The members of a nature-guided party take on a wider, happier outlook. All are glad to be living. The bighorn or wild mountain sheep was seen at close range. Why these animals live in the heights among the peaks the year round is a story that ever stirs. Their scene-commanding, wild environment has exacted of them alertness, positiveness, sharp eyes, and the ability to play safely where there is much space and little substance beneath them. The interest in the lives of these vigorous animals were ever spontaneous. This, like all other subjects, was kept well out of the category of weights and measures. Everything that might have been told about the dissected animal was left unsaid. Dry bones were not measured, nor the scientific name from the tomb of dead language mentioned. Knowing the way is now a minor guiding necessity. Mental development and character are the essentials of a successful guide. He needs to have a wide range of knowledge and to be capable of tactfully imparting this directly and indirectly. The world is beginning to appreciate the necessity of an outside interest. Fortunate is the individual who has a nature hobby. Such an interest is known to improve health, lengthen life, and increase efficiency. An excursion with a nature guide may give an individual a new or a better hobby. Each person receives a chapter in a natural history story that makes him eager for other chapters which he may find anywhere outdoors. Dr. Liberty H. Bailey strikes the keynote, I think, of nature guiding at a number of points in his The Nature Study Idea. At one place in this he says, "I like the man who has had an incomplete course. A partial view, if truthful, is worth more than a complete course, if lifeless. if the man has acquired a power of work, a capability for initiative and investigation, an enthusiasm for the daily life, his incompleteness is his strength. How much there is before him, how eager his eye, how enthusiastic his temper. He is a man with a point of view, not a man with mere facts. This man will see first the large and significant events. He will grasp relationships. He will correlate later. He will consider the details. Timberline, what determines it, and the species of trees that compose it, beavers, their part in conservation and their influence on the settlement and exploration of America, parasitic plants, the story of soil, the birth, life, and death of a lake, the home territory of animals, wind, the great seed sower, are some of the many possible interests of the trail. A few people for years have practiced nature guiding occasionally. It has made good, and it has a place in national life. It carries with it health, mental stimulus, and inspiration. Recently, nature guiding was given a definite place in the national parks by the government, licensing a number of nature guides to conduct people through the wilds. Nature ever is liberalizing, and the nature guide is one of the forces moving for the newer education and for the ideal of internationalism. Nature guiding is not like sightseeing or the scenery habit. The guide sometimes takes his party to a commanding viewpoint or a beautiful spot, but views are incidental. The aim is to illuminate and reveal the alluring world outdoors by introducing determining influences and the respondent tendencies. A nature guide is an interpreter of geology, botany, zoology, and natural history. This guide listened courteously to those who wanted to display their own information, even to those who indulged in nature faking or told stories that were whoppers, but he carefully avoided following their example. Local natural history he often related, and he was sure of an interested audience, for everyone enjoys local color and is glad to have past incidents brought to life. He was a true guide. He had the utmost consideration for those in his care, and a quick eye for the interesting and the beautiful. He had the faculty of being entertaining, instructive, watchful, and commanding, all without his party realizing it. He held the climbers together, keeping everyone alert and in good humor. He is doing a distinct and honorable work for the world. Children enthusiastically enjoy a day with a nature guide, and fortunate the child who can have a number of these excursions. They are thought compelling, interest arousing. Children are led after the manner of old people. They must not be talked down to. The guide may enter a little more intimately into their joys, perhaps, making slight readjustments to their tastes. As a rule, the imagination of children is more readily and definitely fired than that of older people. Climbing a high peak is an excellent experience for any child. 1,000 movies of mountain climbers, 1,000 stories by the climbers themselves, weeks in school, and numerous other experiences cannot do for the child what one day's effort in the heights will do for him. Mountain climbing has rare richness which cannot be transferred, but which any child may make his own in a day. The climb should be made with a nature guide. One other individual or child might go along, but it would be better for the child to have only the guide to interpret his stirring thoughts. A day of this kind will do much for the child's imagination and mental resourcefulness, and give a landmark to his mental horizon that will stand out through life. In this age of movies, it will be a fortunate child who has interest in the fundamentals, who is rich through knowing the principles of nature. An interest in flowers, birds, animals, or geology calls for outdoor excursions, for initiative, gives breadth of view, and is a lifelong resource within. The movies will be improved, but even at their best, they can never do for a child what an outdoor interest will enable him to do more beneficially for himself. One day a guide was out with several children under 8 years of age. They became interested in a double-topped spruce. They learned that the original treetop was broken off, and that the two topmost twigs then bent upward and raced for leadership. They had a dead heat, as it were, and continued rival leaders. During the remainder of the day the children often spotted a double-topped tree. The cones of trees were noticed, and of course the cones of balsam fir caused comment, because these stood erect upon the limbs instead of hanging down from them. In a small area where a forest fire had swept 15 years before, a few trees survived. An examination of 2 of these revealed old fire scars. One of the scars indicated that the tree had been injured by the fire of 15 years before and by another fire 87 years previous. A few young aspens and thousands of young lodgepole seedlings were starting. Why the lodgepole pines were growing here brought out a discussion concerning the trees that commonly were the first to appear in a cleared or burned over area. Only a few species of young trees thrived in the sunlight. Others needed shade in which to start. This principle appealed to the children. An old seed-hoarding lodgepole on the edge of the burned area was surrounded and examined. It had borne a crop of cones each year for 17 years. All of these cones, unopened, clung thickly over its limbs. A few days before, the guide had led a party of older people over precisely the route followed by these children. He had talked to both parties similarly, but apparently the children had more deep and lasting enjoyment out of the day. Who would not be delighted to go with a John Burroughs or a John Muir, to be personally conducted to woods, lakes, and streams by anyone who bubbled over with stories about birds, their home life and their travels, chipmunks and their children, and all the other stories and secrets of the wilderness? It is splendid to have thousands of men, women, and children coming home each year from their vacations, talking of the habits and customs of the animals and plants with which they became acquainted on their enjoyable yet purposeful holidays. Nature guiding need not be confined to national parks. There might well be nature guides in every locality in the land. Fabre has shown monsters and hundreds of little stirring people cooperating or battling in every growth-filled space. City parks and the wild places near cities and villages are available to thousands of people and are excellent places for the cultural and inspiring excursions with nature guides. Ere long, nature guiding will be an occupation of honor and distinction. May the tribe increase. End of chapter 12.